Hi again, welcome to another Razorback screencast. In this episode, we're going to continue texturing and hopefully add a few materials to the front brake area of the machine. So we have these lovely front rotors that I've modeled for the generic sport bike, where they came from. And they are pretty much all geometry. In the past, I've done the holes in the rotor using a sort of an alpha map or a transparency map, but these are just all polygonal objects, so we can pretty easily texture these using a metal shader. But rotors on a real motorcycle are actually created from composite materials. So one part of the rotor will actually be a different color metal than the other part of the rotor. So maybe we can attack that a little bit later on. However, we can deal with this sort of internal mounting point of the rotor, what I like to call the spider. So I'm just going to duplicate our GPS modules material because it already has that nice sort of anisotropic look, and we can just apply it. Sort of change its color a little bit. So for the diffuse color, we can choose sort of like a brownish gold and just see what that looks like. It looks okay. Probably need to adjust the specular materials a little bit as well. Typically, if you make the specular color the similar hue as the base color, it gives it a much more metallic look. So we can actually change the reflection color so it's a little more reddish, goldish, orange. And as soon as we have other stuff in the scene for it to reflect, I'm sure it'll look a lot better. So I think it's time for like a generic sort of aluminium, sort of silverish material. So I'll just create a new material and I'll call it aluminum, and just give it like a nice dark color and then a little bit of reflection, not too much. We can always make it have a sort of a blurry reflection later on if we want. Just give it some width and height in the specular so it has sort of a shine, and then we can start to apply this to the components of the bike that are sort of nondescript aluminum parts. And so one that I can think of right away are these floating rotor rings. So these are the rings that actually hold the rotor in place on bikes that have floating brake rotors, because as the rotor heats up and expands, the rings sort of hold it in place without them having to be bolted to the internal part. And right now I'm just sort of looking around trying to think like what other components could we just color in a generic silver and then forget about them. Probably these little engine components right here. So I'm just going to find those components and color them. So it looks like there used to be a couple bolts here, but they've lost their link to their original, so we can just get rid of those. And you know, looking at the bike in this grayish bluish color, it really makes me want to paint the whole bike in like a dark black so that we can start texturing the other components. But before we do that, let's just try to fill in some of the other gaps. So I'm thinking these parts up here on the end of the arms might be like a generic silverish sort of color. So we can just color those in a basic silver color for now. And the base of the antenna here looks like a good candidate. And as we go along, we're just going to find a few more objects that could benefit from being colored in basic silver. And we don't want to color too many things on this machine silver because it is supposed to be sort of a menacing machine. Okay, so we found a few silver bits. Maybe the ends of these steering rods along with the bracket. Let's see. Where is that object? Push rod mount. Here it is. So you can just color that, and some of these objects are quite incomplete. Stuff that we just never added more detail to, but that's okay. So now that we've sort of colored some of the components silver, what I'm wondering is if we're going to want sort of one material for all the bolts. So we can adjust that material sort of globally. So I'm just going to create a material here and we'll just call it bolts. And for now, I'm actually going to color it hot pink, just so we have a lot of visibility. And so let's try to find the original for as many of these bolts as possible. So we have armor bolts here. And if we color the original pink, you can see it colors several other bolts pink. It saves us a lot of trouble. And we can look for the bolts on this kickstand. So we have the clamp bolts right here. These are instances as well, so we just color the original and it cascades down to all the others. We have these bolts up here, Hazcam bolts. And again, we used a lot of instances there, so it's very easy to just spread the color. And you see it's been quite easy to just populate all of these regions with the bolt color because of our instances. So we can do these as well. From what I remember, these are not, no, they are. They're instances as well. So now that we have most of those bolts done, we can make this not be hot pink anymore. So I can sort of desaturate the color, make it sort of a silverish color. I don't really want it to be too reflective. Don't want it to look like shiny rivets everywhere. Just sort of a dull gray will work for now. There are these like large metal brackets, and I'm not sure how to color these. Let's just create a nice flat black material for them. Maybe we can add some scratches to them later on to give it a better look. So I'm gonna call this flat black Hazcam. And we can just drag that material on. Let's make sure it got applied to the right thing. So right now it's just being applied to the entire Hazcam bracket hierarchy. I'm not sure that's really what I want, but it looks like it's working. So it looks like we have a group for the bolts, and then we have these individual objects. Yeah, we can just apply it to the parent. That works in this case. So that material, we want it to be sort of a flat black. Specular, let's tone down the specular a little bit, widen it out so it's a little less distinct. And I just realized we applied silver to that end of these. Oh, it's an instance, so it just picked it up. Maybe we can apply it to this bar as well. Let's see. Everything's just called cylinder, so it's difficult to select. So let's just color that aluminum. And starting to sort of flesh out the components a little bit more. So let's see, what else can we color? Let's give the armor plates on the side here their own material, because they will be, I think we're going to give them special attention with some nice texturing, but for now let's just give them something. So let's create an armor plates material. And let's find their parent. So we have an entire null object here that holds the armor plates quite conveniently. So what we can do is just apply this material to the parent item for now. And let's give those an interesting color. Maybe so like a dark goldish brown, just so we remember them. That looks pretty good. So that's our armor. Now I guess we could look at the fork tubes. Let's do some work on that. For the fork tubes, I think we should start with a similar material that we used for the front rotor. So let's just duplicate that material and call it fork tubes. Then we should just be able to drag it on. And we can select a fork tube. So we have the upper forks and the fork seal. So the fork seal is this object down here, and that needs to be sort of a black rubber. So I think we have a material we're using for hoses, wires. Let's duplicate the hoses material, call it black rubber, and just darken it slightly. So now we can take that material and color the fork seals. So the upper forks are colored with this material right now that looks really dark, but when we render, it looks pretty good. It looks like that gold sort of color that motorcycle forks often are. Maybe the anisotropic highlight needs to be a little bit wider, so let's do that. We should be able to look at specular 1. Size right now is 0.5, so we can make it 2.5. And sort of rotate this material here to see a preview of what we're doing. And the anisotropic shader happens in layers, I believe. So we may need to increase multiple specular highlights to get that blended effect we really like. And that's starting to look a lot nicer. I think specular number 2 needs to be about 40%. And maybe we can increase its intensity a little bit. Gives much more of a brushed metal look. And I think that's what we were looking for. That looks pretty good. We zoom in really tight and see how that looks. Yeah, it looks alright for now. And we can probably also apply a mapping method to this. It might improve the way it looks. So we'll use cylindrical mapping, switch to our texture tool. And let's see. Here in our texture tab, it seems to be really small, 4 inches. And even though I selected cylindrical mapping, I'm not seeing anything, and that's probably because it's a procedural material. It actually doesn't have texture coordinates. So we have that. Now the housing for these instruments, in other words these objects right here, I'm wondering what they would be. I guess like most other things on the machine they would be black plastic. So do we have like a flat black material? I don't think we do, so we can make one. Let's base it off of the wires material. I'm also going to make these thumbnails a little bit smaller. And so we have a duplicate of the wires material here. Let's just call that black plastic. And I'm just going to tighten up the specular a little bit. And I can just start to apply this. So if I select the top of the hierarchy, I can sort of start applying it. Now, the last time we were texturing these things, we broke the lenses out into their own object, so they're already colored differently. I believe the same should be true for these. For now, flat materials will work just fine. This is a strange sort of mounting object back here. We can color that in the same black plastic. Shouldn't matter too much. It's just It's just sort of a filler object. Now these brackets that are coming out and holding these infrared arrays, I'm thinking we actually want to color those the same as the HazCam brackets. And these cables running from the FLIR camera all the way back, I think we can temporarily just color that with the wires material. It's starting to fill out a little bit. So if we come back here and do a render again, starting to get a little bit more of an interesting look. And so, you know, we have this flywheel here that we have never really addressed, and the batteries next to it. Let's just leave those alone for now, but I want to keep reminding myself that they are there. And while we're at it, let's look at these LiDAR units. So we have these LiDAR brackets, and those can probably be the same material as the HazCam brackets. And so we can probably rename this material to be flat black brackets instead of flat black HazCam. And this is supposed to be the fuel filler cap. I'm not sure if it's actually necessary, but it does add some nice detail. So currently the frame of the machine is, let's see, what is the frame colored as? It's got this matte black metal. So let's make this cap matte black metal as well. Now the HazCams themselves should probably be textured the same way as these instruments up here. And see, I just applied it, but these materials have a black plastic material. So let's select one of these HazCams and apply the black plastic material to them as well. The lenses are already colored in a much more shiny material, so we can forget about those. And then we have the actual HazCams down here. I think this armor material is way too saturated, so I'm just going to reduce the saturation to almost gray. So the HazCams are down here, and I'm thinking these should just be black plastic as well. We can sort of refine those as we get down to it a little bit more. And so it's really starting to look black and stealthy, and we need to make sure that the materials all sort of look a little bit different than the neighboring material, or it'll all just start to fade together. The forks here, there's often very few objects on a motorcycle like this that are perfectly shiny reflective mirror material, but the exposed fork tubes are definitely objects that qualify for that. So I'm just going to create a new material and call it chrome. And the chrome material should have a color of almost pure black, and it should have a reflection of almost completely reflective. And then once you've got that, you can just tweak the specular a little bit depending on what you're looking for. And so we have this chrome material, and we can just apply it to the forks. And the symmetry should take care of putting it to both sides. And if we do a render, we can see it's so reflective that it almost looks black, just because there's nothing else in the scene. So let's go ahead and add something else to the scene and see if that helps a little bit. So I'm going to create a floor object and a sky object and a white material. This material, I'll just call it floor sky. So I'm just going to create this material. It's going to be pure white for now, and I'm going to apply it to the sky and the floor. When we do a render, it doesn't seem like much changes from the viewport, but what we can do is turn on global illumination with just the low presets enabled, and in the options make sure that the default light is turned off, And then we can start to do some GI renders here and just see how those look. Now the chrome is just going to look like pure white right now because it's just reflecting what's around it. But maybe this is going to give us a little bit better of a view into what we're rendering, and we can also at this point create an HDR environment for the reflectivity so we can see some of the reflections happening in the shinier parts of the machine. But I'll leave that as an exercise until next time. So once again, I hope you enjoyed this. I know it's getting to sort of a strange stage of the project now as we're texturing everything. It's much more of a free-form part of the process, but I hope you've enjoyed it thus far, and until next time, see ya.